I would like to run you to 4 different moments throughout my presentation. I would like to give you a short overview what Cities Alliance is. Cities Alliance works mainly for the Global South. I would like to share with you some astonishing urbanization figures which you might know, mainly also from the Global South. Then I would like to have a link to Agenda 2030 in the New Urban Agenda. We talked mainly here about the New Urban Agenda, but we left out Agenda 2030, which is actually the biggest development framework, and then also how the agendas are interlinked. So, yeah, you will go with me a bit to Africa, to Latin America, and to Asia, and then I will try to bring you back. Cities Alliance is a membership organization. We have 34 members. We are based in Brussels. We work as a secretariat. We are based at the UN, so we are a UN entity as well. And we work mainly in urban poverty reduction. So how to create inclusive cities and how to reduce urban poverty reduction in cities, mainly in Africa, Latin America, and in Asia. Why? Because the most urbanization rates, the cities with the most challenges in the rapidly urbanization are, of course, in Africa and Asia, followed by Latin America. Yeah. I just wanted to show you also who the members are, so I understand it as well. So you have now the second time that you also invite international organizations, how we work and how we see urbanization and how to achieve sustainable urban development. These are the members which are currently part from Cities Alliance. Maybe some of them organization you know as well. So we have multilateral, we have bilateral governments, we have Association of Cities, Association of Civil Society, academia, and also private sector. I think it reflects very good and very well that we try to emphasize the importance of multi-level governments and also the importance to bring in all stakeholders who are important for actually achieve sustainable urban development. You see below as well, we have a management board, so a smaller part of the bigger part of the organizations are the one who give us the strategic outreach. Going back, just not going into detail, it's mainly that you have also the information afterwards. How do we work as a global partnership? So all the members who are part of the Cities Alliance commit themselves, demonstrating the sustainable urbanization is only achieved through cities, through inclusive cities. We have global programs, knowledge programs, and we have so-called country programs when we have long-term commitment in selected countries. That is actually the main aspect when we engage in country programs. Where do we have country programs? Just for your background, we have country programs in Uganda, in Ghana, in Burkina Faso, in Ethiopia, in Mozambique, but also, for example, in Brazil and in Guatemala. Here I just want to highlight the importance. So we focus in 4 main pillars when we engage with countries. Mostly that's also countries which are now recognizing that they have an urbanization challenge, that the cities are growing, and that they have to have a common framework on how they're wanting to confront those challenges. The most important thing is the second line. We try to develop with those countries a so-called national urban policy to analyze actually what are the legal framework under which cities are acting. We are always ensuring that civil society is part of the whole process. We work on local strategic development plans and also capacity development at the national level and at the local level. Important here is actually that we as a Cities Alliance Secretariat try to ensure to have an overall framework to give it a common, coherent narrative on how the urban development in a specific country is moving forward. Here maybe just that you see what are actually the topics which globally is of big interest. We have also within the partnership organization, so yeah, specific topics which have been selected by them, which are the most crucial topics currently related to cities, which is equitable economic growth, gender, resilience in migration. Just to understand, so out of the membership organization, you have maybe 10 or 15 organizations who approached the Cities Alliance Secretariat and said, okay, we would like to understand a bit more what is the relation between migration and cities, how can we achieve, for example, equitable economic growth to improvement of public services, and what's the topic of climate change and resilience in cities. Why is this important? Because actually we gather international organizations, civil society and local authorities together to discuss one specific topic and the creation of knowledge. So now I would like to go a bit, moving again from Cities Alliance forward to some urbanization development challenges, which you might know or not. So urbanization, cities has been growing, you know, there has been a strong focus in the narrative that actually biggest problems are megacities, but megacities are actually not the problem. We have approximately 29 big mega cities which made up like 500,000 of inhabitants and 12% approximately from the current urban population. But as we could see in the last years, cities has been growing very rapidly. But most important actually are the secondary cities, the smaller cities. So it depends on which country you are and how the legal framework as there's a definition what is actually secondary cities, what are intermediary cities. And depends, can be between 100,000 or even 1 million, depends on which country you are. So we focus mainly in our work in the secondary cities, because the secondary cities are the most rapidly growing cities. Actually 40% of the urban population are living in cities around 300,000 inhabitants. There are those cities who have the less capacities concerning financial and human capacities, gaps, and yeah. Yeah, maybe I would like also to just emphasize that the urbanization, as you know, goes beyond the administrative boundaries. So urban corridors stretch across the whole countries and beyond, and they grow even into international urban spaces. So actually, if we will have a good policies as well, we don't look only at the mega cities or the smaller cities or the rural or the urban. We really try to have a policy which tries to understand what's the linkages between rural and urban areas and what is actually the system of cities in one country. These figures you might know, so actually the most biggest economic potential which we have is in cities. Cities are mainly the driving force with our country. Between 70% and 80% of the GDP is created in the cities, but at the same time it's also the cities who create the most percentage of global waste, greenhouse gas emissions or global energy consumption. We have the challenge which we know and we also feel here in Europe it's migration. So the whole humanity is moving, mainly young people are moving from Africa to Europe, but also within Africa, between countries. But actually, how are cities dealing with newcomers into the cities? That's also something which we try to understand. What are the receiving communities actually, their challenges, what they have to provide to ensure that also the newcomers are included in their local planning and in their, yeah. Here I would like just to jump also to Africa a bit, the economic development. So we have seen that GDP has been growing, for example, in Africa very rapidly and very fast. It has a GDP approximately from 5% or 6% in the last years, but actually the middle class, this gray 65 and 63%, maintains always the same. So actually you have the main losers, which is the informal sector of the left side. You have a small middle class and only a very minor part at the right side who are the beneficiaries of economic growth. So the question actually is here, how can we ensure to have a more equitable economic growth so that all persons can benefit from it? And one of the aspects is to ensure that actually you have equal access to public services, to health systems, to transport, to education. Just to demonstrate as well the cities, the challenges which we are facing. So that is Philippines on the right side. We are growing as cities, but we also have our environmental limitations. Here, I think that's a nice figure as well, which we could compare an analysis with here, with Britannia as well, but maybe also with European cities, where we try to do an analysis actually what is the financial capacities of smaller cities and how do they invest in their GDP. So you see actually, and that's not a new figure, but just to have the analysis behind is that the most cities have a very small own revenue and a very high dependencies of national transfers, and the GDP, the municipal expenditures per capita is actually very low. It's in some cases only 18% USD per person. This is a figure which I actually like, and you can also apply it or have the same question for different cities. How are the human capacity gaps in smaller cities? What are the potential of smaller cities? And actually, as you see, there is the ideal model on the right side, how actually a city should be managed as well. And what we see, that is now an example from Ethiopia, is that we have a lot of support staff, but we are missing a middle management. So the planning officers, the environmental officers, the finance officers, who are actually the ones who have the expertise and should have the expertise to run the city, are missing. Why is it like that? Okay, there is not sufficient, maybe adequate curriculum, as you might know as well. It's not so prestigious as well to work in a local authority, to work in a small city. It's not very well recognized. And also the salaries which are paid for local authorities are not very attractive. So actually for very well trained people with a high level of education, they would rather go to UN organization, to an international NGO, to mainly also to the national government, but they will not select as a first instance that they would like to work and to develop their career at the local level, which is actually very, very critical, because as I will mention in a while, it's mainly the local level who is important and on the forefront to also implement the different global agendas. Here I just wanted to take you in Africa. I just left it on purpose here to share with you some figures. Maybe just for those don't know, the African cities are mainly facing the challenge of informality. So cities are growing, but mainly the informal sector is growing. Some cities in Africa is an informal sector of actually 60%. The youth bulk is growing rapidly. So cities also have this same challenge, maybe also as here, how to offer the youth actually some alternatives, some jobs, how to prosper, how to grow in their cities. It's actually not possible. So you have a very big informal sector, you have a youth which is growing, and you have environmental challenges. Mainly of the energy is based on biomass in Africa. That means in charcoal, which is also actually not very sustainable and also doesn't even allow a high economic growth. I can shift this one. Yeah, that's what I just mentioned, just to give you the impression. So how cities can develop the informal, the informal sector. Very important, which we also try to always foster, is the civil society engagement. So You can have civil society engagement in Europe, in Bangladesh, in Africa. But civil society, as we also heard in the two previous presentations, is actually on the forefront, the ones who have to collaborate together with the local authorities. So now I would like to run you a bit into the global agendas as well. So that other was a little bit to share with you what are our findings, in which framework are we working, as mainly in Africa, in the global south. And now I would like to mainly give you an overview of the global agendas as well. So we have now 2030. We didn't talk today about Agenda 2030, so we have the New Urban Agenda, we have the Agenda 2030. And actually 2015 was a very important year. It was a year where it started already before, but actually where it was recognized that's the cities who have the main challenges of urbanization, and also the cities who have also the answers to try to implement these global agendas. So if you remember, we had back then the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals. Now we have the SDGs. We increased from 8 goals to 17 goals. I would assume that you also know them almost by heart. The most important thing is also that the SDGs try to have an integrated approach, not only focusing on poverty reduction, which was mainly the Millennium Development Goals, but to try to integrate the development agenda with the environmental agenda. Yes, I think I can leave it here. Yes, maybe let me try. Okay, I don't know if we didn't heard it yet, but once the Agenda 2030 was agreed upon in 2015, so the New Urban Agenda was agreed last year in Quito, and Agenda 2030 1 year before. They agreed also in a standalone goal in SDG 11, which is actually super important for us. So it recognized also the importance of urbanization in cities for achieving sustainable development. So in spite of the dramatic urbanization trends, which I just mentioned before, the city goal was very controversial when their agenda was negotiated, because of course it has political implications. Had political implications saying that national governments having to accept the need to give stronger mandates for resources in subnational levels and to modify the political economy. So actually it hinted directly with the SDG 11 the devolution of power and decentralization. It was also discussed that we should not have a SDG 11 because the different sectorial goals were going to cover the city issues. But then afterwards, it was a clear understanding that the Agenda 2030 has an integrated nature. And as I mentioned before, the agenda is more than only a list of goals, targets, and indicators. It reflects more a holistic development concept. So actually here it becomes important because it's the cities who can be the integrators that link the goals with each other in the urban space. I would like to show you this graphic, which we did a research study with different universities back in 2015 and 2016, who demonstrates actually that 65% of the different targets from the SDGs can only be implemented at the local level. That means with urban stakeholder, with civil society, with the private sector. That makes up approximately 100 indicators of the SDGs, and actually a very big challenge for the cities. Maybe, yeah, here just I can explain just quickly. That's more also that you have it as well. So actually now it's the important point and aspect where different national government, local authorities are trying to implement the SDGs into the national development plans, into the national urban policies, into the local plans, in different agencies as the UN, as philanthropies, as academia are also trying to translate the SDGs and to see how they can support the implementation of the SDGs. sorry. Now, maybe before we come, to the Agenda 2030 and the new urban agenda, two aspects which I also wanted to share with you. I think it was actually a diplomatic masterpiece which was achieved back by then, that you have 195 countries who could agree upon in one specific global agenda as the new urban agenda and as the SDGs. I think it was a actually important process where civil society and local authorities also tried to engage in the negotiations. And I think also in the current international politics, it will be almost not possible to have this diplomatic exercise. I don't know if you remember as well as when Trump put in public as well he is going to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, the climate agreement, which was agreed upon in 2015. There was a huge open letter from hundreds of cities and also national governments and universities in the United States demonstrating, no, we are still we are going to be part in the implementation of the international agreements. What I want to say is just to emphasize actually cities are now acting globally and locally and are becoming much more important for national governments for the implementation of international agreements. We have also other networks maybe which you can just mention so that you know it as well. So different networks are growing up and increasing, as for example Government of Mayors, ICLE, but also C40, which are different cities coming together and trying to have a commitment between themselves and publicly on how they try to confront climate change issues and what activities they would like to do on adaptation and mitigation to climate change. The New Urban Agenda is a very important document as well. We have the European Urban Agenda as well. And the New Urban Agenda, you know actually what happened last year in Quito happens actually every 20 years. And that document should foremost guide us towards urbanization and gives us some hints actually of how we're going to implement the SDGs. You can implement a new urban agenda, but actually what it does is gives you some very key principles on how to implement Agenda 2030. It draws very much on the multi-level governments, the importance of multi-level governments, and also emphasize the principles of subsidiarity and devolution of powers. So coming again, saying actually we have to give cities much more of a mandate and power to provide their public services. Here it's maybe just important as well that you know that this international agreements, the Agenda 2030 and the New Urban Agenda, are monitored in a regular base. So there are annual SDG reports. There are high-level political forums which take place every year in New York at the UN. And they select every year 5 SDGs which national governments are reporting for. So here again, the reports which are submitted are in a voluntary base because it's not a binding exercise or binding law. But however, we have currently more than 70 countries who committed themselves to report on how they're implementing the different global agendas, the SDGs, sorry. You have the UN Statistical Commission, and then on the right side, which I think is even more important, it's from the local authorities, the cities, and also the civil society to develop some kind of shadow reports, to also go to the UN and from their perspective, and also from the academia, to report how urbanization is proceeding and how how the implementation of Agenda 2030 is proceeding and what they have advanced so far. Here, what I just want to demonstrate actually is the Agenda 2030, which we have to implement in the upcoming years, is really a very strong integrated development framework, which should be actually also part of all our plans, from the national government plans and also local development plans, and that although it's not binding, actually countries come together to peer learn and also to account themselves on how they're doing progress. Here, just the countries which you could see who committed, the cities who committed themselves to do an additional report to the national governments. So also in New York, different cities presented their reports, and there is a study which you can also check. Yeah. So here just, I would like, I repeated a bit already, I just can summarize. How are national governments dealing now with the implementation of the different agendas? I tried to put it very graphically and easy to understand. So you have at the global level these different agreements. At the left side you see somebody from the national government or somebody from the local authority actually not really understanding how these different global agendas are integrated, how to speak to each other. Then there is an exercise, of course, to see how Agenda 2030 and the different climate agreements can be part of national development plans and how to break them down as well into local plans, maybe also working with some pilot initiatives. So if you know a bit, there are several exercises which we call localizing the SDGs with different toolkits and different handbooks just for national government and local authorities to support even this breakdown at the different levels. So what are actually the challenges? You always have challenges. It's not just too easy. You have the framework and say, okay, now we have the framework and it's easy to implement. So I think at the left side, the importance is how to include also the academia into the whole discussion. We have still the problem of the policy interface with academia, policy public and, science, knowledge, policy, practice interface. We have still not clear the understanding how cities work, the system of cities, so still a lot of knowledge which has to be provided. That's why the strong need of academia, which also goes back what I explained, what Cities Alliance does at the beginning is to do some research around specific topics. For example, migration, resilience, and gender in cities. So others challenges which we have is to see what are actually the current legal frameworks which we have in countries. So I tried to hint it about that both agendas, Agenda 2030 and also the New Urban Agenda, talks very much about devolution of power and subsidiarity principle. So actually the first step would be also to see what actually are the legal frameworks in countries which exist. Fiscal decentralization, how is the participation, how does public participation or civil participation work? Is there a participatory planning process existent? How is the data disaggregation? So actually the second column is really very important because it gives you somehow an overview to understand are actually cities which are now in the forefront who are facing urbanization challenges, even having the mandate to provide, for example, improved public services and to implement all the agendas. On the right side, the importance is the question, how do we do multi-stakeholder engagement? It's still difficult. We know that it's important to work together with civil society, public, with local authorities, civil society and private companies, but however, it's still a challenge. We don't know how monitoring should work of these global agendas. I just mentioned it before, but however, it's very difficult to understand how city data generation and city disaggregated data should be working. I think here important is as well that it's clear that national government and local authorities should not only generate data to report in at the UN, but actually the most important thing is to report to your citizens and to be accountable. So coming back what we as Cities Alliance do, so we think actually the main conditions to have inclusive, sustainable cities is when you have actually legal frameworks in place, as I already mentioned, and the capacity development. It was one of the most important things. So one is to support cities in long-term planning exercises, participatory planning exercises, and also the collaborative governments and inclusive partnerships. Here just an exercise, I don't want to go into deep as well. It's the city enabling environment, one exercise and tool which we developed in Cities Alliance and we carried out in 40 countries in Africa and 30 countries in Asia, where we actually try to understand how the legal background are and are actually the national enabling environment, the legal framework of each of those countries, providing the cities with the mandate to act. Actually an exercise which you could do in every part of the world. Yeah, I can bring this. And then other exercises which we have done in Uganda as well, and all of the world, it's now happening in parallel, is supporting local governments together with civil society to do an analysis actually how to break down the SDGs and how to use the different targets and indicators as part of their development plans. Aspect which I can mention as well, I talked about the big informality sector in Africa. One initiative which we have, and you can also apply it in different contexts, is the working together with the urban poor. We call it working together with slum dwellers. So actually, how can we support the negotiation skills between urban poor and the local authority to come to an agreement on what are the priorities in the area and to decide also what are the main investments to be done in their area. So as you know, but informal sectors have always the risk of evictions. So cities are growing, the informal sector is growing. The allocation of the informal settlements are normally always in risk-prone area. So it can actually happen from one day to the other. The local authority or the national government decides just to clean up the space and people just send back for where they come or they stay without houses. So here is a big exercise to support the informal settlements, giving them a voice, how to map, enumerate their area, how many households, what's their access to water, to sewage, and also to present those kinds of data and maps to the local authorities. And also the local authorities, for them to accept that this data is actually equally valid as other data. Yes, and maybe just education. So there are different exercises of planning schools and Association of African Planning Schools, or in Asia as well, where we try to promote the network between different planning networks, planning masters universities, to have a network between the region, between different countries, so that they can also try to support the development of the curriculum. Actually, what are urban planners learning in this context? What are the main challenges they should be learning? And also to have common researches together. The same networks we have in Europe, it's called NEROS, which we are supporting as well. And actually, yeah, we think it's an important aspect to promote further and ensure that you have curriculum in place which are actually responding to the development trends which we are facing. I think with this I end. I jumped from Africa to Latin America to the SDGs, and now I'm finished. Thank you very much.